I don't like Mike Love at all. No.
Why is that, Rob?
Because I don't like his attitude is too egotistical.
Help carry on Brian's legacy.
Well, he's there in all the hit songs.
For over 6 decades, Mike Love kept quiet about the man who shaped and shattered the Beach Boys. Through lawsuits, fallouts, and a rivalry that became legend, he rarely spoke from the heart about Brian Wilson. But that changed. At 84 years old, just 26 hours after Brian's death, Mike Love finally broke the silence. And what he said, no one saw coming. This wasn't a press release. It wasn't damage control. It was personal. A black and white photo, a few raw words, and a video message that left fans speechless. But why did he wait until now? Was it guilt, grief, or something more strategic? Because behind this final tribute lies a tangled history, one of genius and jealousy, harmony and heartbreak, brotherhood and betrayal. From their childhood in California to courtroom showdowns, from chart-topping hits to public feuds. This is the story of how 2 cousins changed music forever, and how, in the end, only one was left to speak. And what Mike Love said in those few minutes may have changed how we remember both of them. Section 1. The final silence ends. The news hit on the morning of June 11th, 2025. Brian Wilson, the reclusive, brilliant heart of the Beach Boys, was gone. Fans mourned. Musicians around the world paid tribute. Social media exploded with grief. But Mike Love, the man who had been by Brian's side from the very beginning, said nothing. For more than a day, his silence was deafening. And for anyone who knew the decades of tension between them, it wasn't just silence, it was suspense. Then, 26 hours later, something changed. At exactly 8:00 a.m. on June 12th, Mike Love finally spoke. But not through a manager, not with a press team. It was a black and white photo. 2 boys, Brian and Mike, arms over shoulders, years before the fame, the feuds, the fallout. The caption read, "Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal." It was raw, simple, real, but that was just the beginning. What followed was a 94-second video. No music, no flash, just Mike Love in a dark suit, holding a photo from 1965. His voice low, steady, and for the first time in years, he didn't defend. He didn't deflect. He just said the words, "I didn't just lose a colleague, I lost a brother." The statement shocked fans, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. There was no brand polish, no Beach Boys nostalgia, just one man finally saying what had gone unsaid for decades. But to understand why those words mattered, why this moment hit so hard, you have to go back to where it all started, before the lawsuits, before the bitterness, before it all fell apart. Section 2. Brothers by blood, rivals by sound. Before the world knew them as the Beach Boys, they were just 2 California kids. Cousins, not brothers by birth, but close enough that it didn't matter. Brian Wilson and Mike Love grew up surrounded by sun, surf, and the promise of something bigger. And in 1961, they made that dream real. With their harmonies tight and their image even tighter, the Beach Boys exploded. Brian was the composer, the studio visionary. Mike was the voice, the frontman, the one who turned Brian's ideas into something millions could sing along to. Together, they created a sound that defined American youth. Bright, carefree, and dripping with summertime magic. Hits like Surfin' USA, Fun, 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 and I Get Around weren't just songs. They were cultural blueprints. And at first, Brian and Mike thrived in that partnership. One dreaming in complex melodies, the other delivering them straight to the crowd. But even in those early days, the differences ran deep. Brian was already chasing something more, something bigger than surfboards and convertibles. He heard symphonies in his head. Mike, on the other hand, was laser-focused on the formula. What worked, what sold, what people expected. And when Brian started drifting toward more ambitious, experimental music, Mike didn't just raise an eyebrow, he pushed back. That push would soon turn into a rupture that would shape the rest of their lives. Section 3. Pet Sounds, Smile, and the First Real Divide. By 1966, Brian Wilson had left the beach behind, at least in his mind. While the rest of the band was still singing about cars and waves, Brian was in the studio crafting Pet Sounds, a sprawling, emotional masterpiece that would redefine pop music forever. Layered harmonies, orchestral swells, and aching vulnerability. It was the sound of an artist pushing every boundary he knew. Critics hailed it as genius. The Beatles said it changed everything. But Mike Love, he wasn't sold. To him, it felt like a betrayal, a sharp left turn away from what had made them famous. He didn't see a revolution. He saw a risk to the band, to their success, to the formula that had never failed. And when Brian followed Pet Sounds with an even more ambitious project, Smile, a psychedelic, abstract symphony to God, the tension reached a breaking point. Mike warned it was too weird, too out there, too detached from what fans wanted. And as the pressure mounted, Brian cracked. Smile was shelved. Brian withdrew. And the band, the partnership, started to unravel. Fans saw the headlines. They heard the music change. But they didn't know just how deep the divide had become. Because for Brian, it was the beginning of a mental and emotional spiral. And for Mike, it marked a line in the sand, the moment he became the man trying to save the band, even if it meant going against the one who built it. Section 4. The lawsuit that broke it all. By the 1990s, whatever was left of the fragile bond between Brian Wilson and Mike Love finally collapsed. Not in the studio, but in a courtroom. Mike sued Brian, not over a disagreement, not over royalties, but over authorship. 35 songs, including some of the Beach Boys' biggest hits. Mike claimed he'd co-written them, but had been left off the credits by Brian's father, Murray Wilson, who once managed the band. The lawsuit was brutal, public, ugly. Mike won $13 million, an official credit on a slew of iconic tracks. But the cost wasn't just legal. Fans turned on him. The media painted him as the villain, cashing in on the fragile genius of a man many saw as broken. It didn't matter that Mike had written lyrics to hits like California Girls or Fun Fun Fun. What mattered was the optics, that Brian was struggling with his mental health, and Mike was dragging him into court. The victory cemented Mike's legal legacy, but it destroyed something deeper: trust, sympathy, goodwill. From that point forward, the story wasn't two partners who built a band. It was a fallen icon, and the man blamed for pulling him down. And Brian, he didn't fight back publicly. He just faded further into seclusion. The rift was no longer speculation. It was official. Section 5. Two Beach Boys, one name, and a public war. After Carl Wilson, the band's quiet peacemaker, died in 1998, the Beach Boys fractured completely. But this time, it wasn't just about music. It was about ownership. Mike Love legally secured the rights to the name The Beach Boys. He took it on tour, kept the brand alive, kept the lights on. To many, he was preserving history. To others, he was erasing it. Because Brian Wilson, the band's musical soul, was no longer on stage. He performed under his own name, alongside Al Jardine and David Marks. Other founding members now relegated to a different orbit. Fans were confused. Two Beach Boys, two competing tours, two versions of the same legacy. And through it all, the bitterness lingered. Brian rarely commented. Mike stayed on the road. Every reunion seemed impossible. Until somehow it wasn't. In 2012, for the band's 50th anniversary, the impossible happened. Brian and Mike reunited. They toured. They released an album. That's Why God Made the Radio. For a moment, it felt like closure. But just as quickly as it came together, it fell apart again. Mike ended the reunion, choosing to tour without Brian or the others. He said it was a business decision, a contractual end date, nothing personal. But fans didn't buy it. The image stuck. Mike Love, once again, shutting the door just when things felt right. And Brian, he stayed quiet, which only made the divide louder. Section 6, a reunion. Then another rift. The 2012 reunion should have been the healing moment fans had waited decades for. The classic harmonies were back. The music felt timeless. And for a brief window, it looked like Brian Wilson and Mike Love had finally put the past behind them. But behind the scenes, things were already unraveling. As soon as the tour wrapped, Mike announced he'd continue performing as the Beach Boys, without Brian, Al Jardine, or David Marks. Critics accused him of firing Brian again. Mike pushed back, saying it had all been agreed upon. Just business, no bad blood. But the damage was done. Fans were stunned. Brian said nothing. And the reconciliation, like so many before it, dissolved into silence. What had started as a golden anniversary ended with a familiar feeling: disappointment. And just when things couldn't seem more fractured, politics entered the picture. Section 7. A public divide. Music meets politics. In 2020, the fracture between Brian Wilson and Mike Love took on a new and very public dimension. Mike performed at a fundraiser for Donald Trump's re-election campaign. The moment hit social media fast, sparking outrage and confusion. After all, the Beach Boys had always been about unity, sunshine, the sound of summer. But now, the band's name was being linked to a political movement that divided millions. Within hours, Brian Wilson and Al Jardine released a statement. They made it crystal clear they had nothing to do with the performance and did not support the use of the Beach Boys name in that context. For many fans, this wasn't just a performance, it was a declaration. The rift between Brian and Mike wasn't just artistic anymore, it was ideological. Mike didn't apologize, he didn't backtrack, he simply kept touring. The split was now complete, not just between two musicians, but between two very different versions of what the Beach Boys meant. One rooted in personal expression and emotional depth, the other in commercial continuity and control. And as the years passed, one question remained: would these two ever find common ground before it was too late? Section 8, the final goodbye and what it really meant. In early 2025, there were whispers, a rare interview, a softened tone. Mike Love, for once, wasn't defensive. He mentioned seeing Brian again, casually, said it wasn't as negative as people think. For longtime fans, it felt like something might be shifting. But before anything more could happen, it was over. Brian Wilson passed away on June 11th, 2025, still under legal protection, his health in steady decline, his memories fading. And for a brief moment, Mike Love said nothing. Then, on June 12th, came the post, a black and white photo. Two boys, decades before fame would twist everything. What followed was even more striking. A quiet, 94-second video. No production, no branding. Just Mike in a dark suit, sitting in silence, holding a photo of him and Brian inside Capitol Studios in 1965. His voice was low. He didn't defend himself. He didn't rehash the past. He simply said, "We didn't always agree, but what we created together is undeniable. I didn't just lose a colleague, I lost a brother." For the first time in decades, there was no tension, no spin, just grief. It wasn't about winning, it wasn't about credit, it was about what had been lost, and maybe, just maybe, what could have been. Section 9, public reaction, redemption or too late. Mike Love's message was everywhere within hours. NPR quoted it. Variety ran a headline. Even The Guardian called it his most human moment. And for the first time in a long time, it seemed like people were willing to listen. Not to the frontman, not to the businessman, but to the man himself. But the reactions weren't all forgiving. Some fans saw it as redemption. A long overdue acknowledgement from a man who had carried his own bitterness for too long. They praised him for showing vulnerability, for not hiding behind a press team, for facing the moment head on, even if it came late. others weren't so sure. One viral comment summed up the skepticism. Brian was alone for years. Now that he's gone, Mike gets to write the ending. The timing to some felt convenient. No confrontation. No chance for Brian to respond. No real closure. Just Mike, alone in front of a camera, saying what he wanted. Unchallenged. But whether you saw it as sincere or strategic, one thing was undeniable. It marked the end of something much bigger than just a feud. Because now, only one voice remains.